Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Ketubot, pages 18 through 24, Yudchet through Chaf Daled. 18. Ha'edim she'amru aval anusim hayinu, hare'elu ne'emanim. Witnesses who say that yes, we signed on this document, however, we were coerced into doing so, they are believed. However, the Gemara then issues a caveat. Lo shanra she'amru anus menu machmat nefashot. When do we say that they're believed? If they claim that we were coerced under penalty of a threat of death, that the bad guys will kill us if we don't sign on this document, then their retraction is accepted. However, if they say we were coerced by financial pressures, we're not going to believe them. Why? My timer. Ein adam mesim atzmo rasha. A person does not make themselves into a wicked individual, meaning we do not accept testimony that incriminates the person offering the testimony. And since it is unacceptable halachically to sign on to a false document under threat of financial pressures, then this person is admitting, I did a terrible thing, I did a sin. And so we're not going to accept that kind of a say-so. By contrast, a person is allowed to and is in fact encouraged to sign on a false document if they're under threat of death, because martyrdom is only something that is to be done in the face of the three cardinal sins of murder, adultery, or idolatry. So therefore, nefashot will believe their retraction, but if it was anus machmat mamon, we will not believe their retraction. 19. Sefer she'eno muga. If you have a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll that is not corrected, it has a flawed text, then Amar Rabbi Ami, for 30 days you're allowed to maintain possession of that flawed book. Mikana Asr, however, beyond that, you're not allowed to retain possession of that flawed book. Shne'emar al tishkam ba'alecha avla, that a sinister thing, an injustice, should not reside in your home. And this flawed text of the Torah might result in people making erroneous halachic rulings. And so an injustice could emerge from this Sefer She'eno Muga, therefore you're not allowed to have it in your home. Chaf 20. Tanu Rabbanan. Kotev adam eduto lashtar. Ume'ir alea afilu achar kama shanim. A person who wants to offer testimony, but the case is not happening anytime soon, is allowed to write down their recollections of the events in question, and then use that to refresh their memory before they testify several years later. Now, they cannot simply submit their notes, contemporaneous notes, as a form of testimony, because halacha only recognizes verbal, oral testimony. But you could rely upon the notes to jog your memory. But then the Gemara says, you're only allowed to use these notes to jog your memory if really you recall the basic details on your own and are using the notes to fill in the gaps. Rabbi Yochanan, however, says, Rabbi Yochanan says, even if you don't really remember much at all, you can use those notes to refresh your memory. Chaf Aleph 21. What happens if three people who themselves function as a court saw the new moon, and they want to be able to do the Kiddush HaChodesh, the sanctification of the new moon, which requires two witnesses to testify in the presence of at least a court of three. So the three of them are the court, and they saw the moon. Well, what do? Well, Ya'amidu Shnayim v'yoshiv macharem etzel yachid. Two of them should get up and function as witnesses, and they should take two of their colleagues and sit them down with the third fellow, and then these three, the two plus the one, shall now serve as a beit din. And these two who saw the new moon will testify in front of this now ad hoc beit din of three. And the court will then say, sanctified, it's a new month. Because one person could not function as a beit din alone. A court must have a minimum of three. The one guy who is still seated from the original beit din cannot go it alone. Why can't the two who testified sit back down and then once again function as dayanim, judges? The answer is, there's a concept that in Torah law, witnesses cannot then turn around and function in the very same case as judges. So that's why it was necessary for them to get up and serve as edim and have other people in their place serve as dayanim. 22. Amrani shbeiti utarani. What happens if a woman says, I was taken captive, however I was not violated? So do we believe her in order to allow her to marry a Kohen or to remain married to her Kohanic husband? So the Mishnah says, Ne'emenet. We'll believe her. She'apeh she'asar hu apeh she'itir. Because the mouth that forbade is also the mouth that permits. She said she was taken captive, which is Pesha Asar. But there's also, I wasn't violated, which is Pesha Hitir. So, we'll believe her. However, if there are other witnesses who tell us that she was taken captive, so we're not relying exclusively on her say-so for our knowledge that she was taken captive, then her say-so that she was not violated is not believed. However, let's say, initially, she tells us she was taken captive, but she was not violated. And the law is, we'll believe her to remain married to a Kohen. But then subsequent to that, witnesses do come forward who say she was taken captive. At that point, the judgment was already rendered, and we're in a b'diavad stage. So we will not force her to divorce her Kohanic husband on the basis of late arriving witnesses, after she had already told us what she told us. Chav Gimel, 23. Shtei nashim, there were two women. Shnishbu, they were taken captive. This one says I was taken captive but I was not violated. And this one says I was taken captive but I was not violated. Einan ne'emanot. The Mishnah says they are not to be believed. Now we're talking about a scenario where there are witnesses to the fact that they were taken captive. So we don't require their say-so about the captivity. It's not a case of Pesha Asar, Pesha Yitir. It's just a case of sad story. They were taken captive and they have a claim. I did nothing bad happened to me. However, if they testify about each other, they were taken into captivity and were together the whole time, and each one testifies about the other that they were not violated, then ne'emanot, we will believe them, and the women will be allowed to marry Kohanim, because for the purpose of this kind of testimony, even someone who is normally not qualified to testify is allowed to testify, whether it's an Isha, or a Shivcha, or an Eved. All those categories of people are good for this purpose. Chavdal. Are we allowed to rely upon the fact that someone who did the Birkat Kohanim in the synagogue, they did the elevation of the palms, Birkat Kohanim in the synagogue, on that basis they can be declared to be a Kohen for genealogical purposes? Rav Chisda and Rav Yavina had a machlokas on this. Chadamar Malin, one said we can elevate someone to Kohanic status on the basis of duchening, and one said no. And the halacha is ein ma'alin. We cannot fully elevate someone to a genealogical status of Kohen just because someone saw them duchening in the shul. Everyone have a great week.